Hello again. Finally getting around to doing that. Well, it's only been a day or two. A video Ludwig wanted me to do about my grandfather. Um, Now there's not all I can really say that isn't really biographical. Um, and not that those things aren't interesting. And my granddad, in my view, is a very interesting man. But it's always good to try and relate these things to a larger context. It gives them a purpose beyond themselves. Which renders them more valuable in my view, especially with how easily the kind of egotistical or vain undertones of doing something like this, recording myself talking about my own life, those undertones can come out if they're allowed to do so. But to relate things to a higher context kind of subdues that, which I think is a good thing. But my granddad, when was he born? I think 1945. So, just when the war had ended. And he grew up in North London in Edmonton. My family is based in London. His father was a lorry driver, and he was one of like 7 siblings. Was one of 7 kids. So it was a busy household. And they were very, very, very poor. Very hard up. Like, I'm just trying to think of some examples. I mean, rationing carried on for a while after the war had ended, of course. But my granddad left school when he was 13 and immediately began working on lorries. I think a truck depot or something like that. So, lower working class, very English proletarian, and that permeates his entire character. The idea that you get from life what you give. And as he grew older, I think he married my grandmother when he was 21, and she was 19 or 20. So how times have changed. But that was that, and there's the number of stories. My granddad is a storyteller. He ought to sit down and write a fucking book, but he isn't. He's not a stupid man, far from it. But he isn't academic. He's not an intellectual or intellectually minded. As that's quite unsurprising. And that isn't a bad thing or a good thing. It's just his character. But he really ought to write a book of all the stories and so on, because he'll often tell stories, and he has an astounding memory. I mean, he's in his 70s now, and he's still working. I mean, he wouldn't know what to do with himself if he wasn't working. Work equals living. That's how you get value and purpose out of life. One of the most profound comments he ever made to me was a passing statement regarding employment. I think I was kind of thinking about, just a little job at the time. This is last year, I think, or the year before. And he said to me, and this is just a passing comment in relation to the broader conversation. And he said, "Look, boy, in life there's 3 B's: birth, bread, and burial." And that really encompasses, in my view, the worldview of my grandfather and those like him. And it isn't. I don't want to call it nihilism. I mean, my granddad isn't religious. He's quite anti-religious, actually. He just sees religious structures as a way of controlling people. That's his English individualism kind of seeping into that, of course. But he just sees religion as a tool which is used to confine and constrict people, when the higher-ups, specifically of the Anglican and Catholic Church, have been known, as we all know, to be extraordinarily morally ill people in their private lives and so forth. So to him, that's kind of his image of these things, of religion, organized religion, Christianity. It's just used to control people. Regarding the Middle East, that's what Islam, that's what religion does. These people blow themselves up. That's what religion does to people. And it is a simplistic view. I don't agree with the view, but that's his sort of worldview. It isn't nihilistic. I don't think it is nihilistic, because his worldview, one attributes value and purpose to one's life in a sort of utilitarian, you might even say Machiavellian manner. Not to a kind of Stalinist extreme where if you're out of work you're a completely useless person and you should die. But that life is valuable through one's creative externality. Or not so much creative, but actually, yeah, creative. Not in an artistic manner, not artistically expressionist or emotional, but physical and utilitarian. So in his case, regarding his proletarian kind of spirit, I suppose. So, life has meaning. One's life has meaning. You get value out of life, obviously from one's family and providing for one's family, and that is another big part of it. But essentially, and this is actually the same thing as that, having a use, having a function, that's a very large part of one's worldview from that perspective. You have, the greater your function and the greater the more other people need you and rely upon you, and the better you can fulfill those needs of others, not just fleeting desires, but needs, requirements. The more purpose there is in your life, and the more fulfilled you are, at least in his case. I mean, the only reason he's still working now, he doesn't need to work. But the only reason he works is so he can give his family nice things, presents at Christmas and so forth. That's kind of it, which is, I think a good philosophy for a proletarian, and it is a very proletarian philosophy. It's a very working class philosophy. It's a very Shudra, to use a Hindu term, for the lowest caste, the servile, the servant caste. It's that sort of mentality. He wouldn't believe, for example, that one's life is valuable based upon how one conforms to morality as imposed upon you by religion, because that would be constrictive of one's individualism. Okay, so again, but that is a general character of the English working class, I believe, which is part of the reason why religion is dying in England, in Britain. And you have the emergence of an underclass now who don't have the hard-working resolve of people like my grandfather, who haven't ever gone without, who had never been hungry or poor, or genuinely poor. And he has, and he's built his way out of it. He's worked his way out of it. But you now have an emergence of the poor in this country who don't have these things, and they rely on welfare and so forth. So there is such a huge divide between the old guard working class and the kind of new working class in this country, or poor, lower class. For instance, my grandfather has owned businesses throughout his life. I mean, the amount of enterprises and organisations he's been a part of, businesses he's began and started, and jobs he's had, loads of different things, is quite amazing actually. But I mean, he has started a couple of businesses, notably with his son, in the 90s, I think. but mostly he's been working for other people, for other companies. Right now he works for a company, although really works for the boss, more or less. But he's always been in that kind of servile position. The kind of, just smile and take their money. That sort of attitude regarding work. And it is a very materialistic worldview. It is a totally materialistic worldview. Or at least in how it's realized and how things are fulfilled. Emotional needs they can only be fulfilled if one has a family, but aside from that, they are fulfilled materially. I mean, for instance, he needs to go and get right now, his leg operated on, and the doctors have told him he needs to stop smoking, but he won't. And he lies to his wife about stopping smoking, he hasn't. And there are little streaks of moral laziness that permeate the character of the man. I don't think they should be there. I don't think they're good. I think they're bad. I think they're streaks and they're stains on his otherwise excellent character. And they are purely by his own choice. And it's a pity that they are there. But there's a kind of... But again, this relates to the individualism I described. I can do what I like. Don't tell me what to do. You don't know me. I know me. It's a very self-understanding worldview, understanding of the world. Very self-knowing, very self-conscious, and that lends itself to an understanding of one's own flaws, but the acceptance that I'm allowed to do what I like. Perhaps I shouldn't, but I will. But it's funny, the kind of Cockney, he's a genuine Cockney. You get a lot of these kind of pretend, false sort of people pretending to be Cockneys. But my granddad is a genuine Cockney man, Cockney geezer. He talks like that sometimes. If he goes into if we go into a store or a shop or somewhere, he'll address people by cocker. Cocker, like a cockerel, which is like, find people saying that nowadays. It's so, hello cocker. He'll say things like that. But it's just but he also has mercantile skill in reading people and making sure no one has anything over him, and in negotiations with people, and in not sneakiness or slyness, but cleverness, like a fox, I suppose. Resourcefulness, regarding getting a good deal out of people. He knows how to get things. Again, it's just really stereotypical, but he's a man who can acquire things, and I won't divulge any more about that. Nothing really illegal, nothing like drugs or anything. But he's a handyman. He's a jack of all trades. But he also has a silver tongue, which is an amusing trait to witness when it's in action. Talking to people and just the psychology of it. It's all very interesting, and you wouldn't expect it unless it catches you off guard. But 6, 7 decades of dealing with people, you learn a thing or two. But I suppose to bring things to a more egotistical level, my grandfather has really only been the ever stable male figure I've ever had in my life. My father left when I was 2 years old. There was a stepdad who entered the picture until I was 13 who wasn't a nice person. And my uncle and I don't get on. I mentioned this somewhere else, but he's an aggressive person. Not an evil, cruel way, it can become that. But he's just a very in-your-face sort of aggressive person, and I'm too relaxed, I'm too passive, and I don't like that at all. It just gets it's just a huge red flag, and it just screams danger to me psychologically. I just feel extraordinarily unsafe around him. Possibly that relates to what my experiences with the stepdad, but that's not a topic blah blah blah, whatever. But nevertheless, my granddad has been the only kind of stable authority figure, the only stable male figure I've ever had. Obviously, that lends itself to complications simply due to the fact that he is 51 years older than I am. No, he's older than that. No, 52 or 3 or 4 years older than I am. I mean, that's a huge generational divide. And that, obviously, there are areas where just think in different ways. Also considering my personality and the fact that I am a black sheep amid my family. I am an intellectual sort. I'm an artist sort. I'm not working class of spirit. It's not my mentality. I don't approach things from that sort of materialistic utilitarianism. That's not just. I just instinctively don't go for that sort of approach with life, with my questions about life. The fact that I have questions about life, existential questions, for example, that's just a load of old rubbish that you should grow out of, according to the working class mentality. Because it's a mentality of survival, of physical survival, first and foremost. It's disregarded any religious presence, so it's relegated itself totally to the physical, and that's what it's all about. Physical survival. How do you get by in the urban environment? In London in the 50s and 60s, how do you get by there? How do you get one over on people? How do you get work? Well, there's plenty of work in that time, but how do you get the right sort of work? How do you get a luxury here and there? Who do you get to know? All these sorts of questions. And that's definitely my grandfather's. That's kind of what shaped him as a person. So I suppose there's not much I can really add to all that without going into like really petty biographical details which don't really mean anything. At least not to anyone out there. Yeah, I suppose that'll do. So thank you for listening.